Hey, welcome back nerds, Fino here, with a commentary on the Izou exhibition quest. This one is kind of a bastard, especially if you don't rush it down, but thankfully there are some, relatively, well, consistent's not the right word, but there are ways of defeating him that don't require too much investment, as you can see here with this wishy-washy team. I decided, you know what, let's do a Circe run, but let's use a backline of common servants. I'm not going to say a low rarity, because it does include Waver and Helena, but you know. They're among the more common high rarity servants. And in exchange for running a bunch of low rarity backliners, I decided, you know what? Let's give them really expensive CEs like Good Good Poster Girl and Fragment of 2030. Indecisive as always. So the idea behind using Circe against Izou is that she can lock him up by turning him into a pig. And Izou, when he has free reign to attack you with his face cards, does huge amounts of damage, especially if he crits, and especially in Phase 2. But in Phase 1, the mechanic is that Izou will immediately adapt to whatever card type you're attacking him with. If you attack him with a Buster card, he gains Buster resistance, Quick card, Quick resistance, and Arts card, Arts resistance. And so the idea behind dealing damage to him, or making your damage stick rather, is that you jump between different card types, and generally you don't use the same card twice in a row. To complicate matters, he has NP damage resistance, and it's fairly substantial. It's not absolute, but even with the damage CE, like my casters did around 40k. I did another run with Murasaki, which was a clusterfuck, but interesting in its own way. So in this fight, I'm just sort of chipping away at him in Phase 1, alternating my cards, the like. You do need a way of parrying his NP, because if you fail to do that, things can get very ugly. Of course, turning him into a pig fixes this problem too, or at least it keeps him at bay for a while. Let's see. Now, I talked about the Murasaki run earlier, and one thing Murasaki has, well, she has two. One, she can NP seal him, which is really annoying for him. And second of all, she can use a buff block. Now, the buff block is really, well, it depends on whether he opts to use his buffs, but if he does, you just screwed him big time, because he has, like, his one-turn evasion, and he also has, like, a ton of crit buffs. Just a ton of crit buffs, already baked into his kit. And if he tries to spam those on the turn that you NP him, he's just screwed. Now, on that run, I made a mistake, because I would often end up with multiple arts cards that I had to use, and I tended to favor Murasaki's NP over her arts card. I think that was a mistake. I think if I had just hit him with an arts, or yeah, if I had hit him with the arts card, like the standard arts card, would have done more damage. So it's something to keep in mind if you're running that sort of team. But yeah, because Izou adapts to your card, this actually gives casters with mismatched decks a little bit of an advantage over ones with mono decks. So Circe is good here. I had a fair bit of luck running Shuten Caster. I used her in the, or on today's stream, but although my backline was pretty stacked in that. Okay, so Helena bites it. I bring in Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles sort of runs on the same principle that Murasaki does when it comes to buff blocking him. If Izou can't stack his standard skills, you can maintain your damage onto him. And the Phase 2 mechanic that you have to worry about is that every turn Izou will gain a stack of anti-humanoid damage. Meaning that you will just get fucked up as he stacks that buff over multiple turns. Now, the good news is that every time he kills a servant, he loses all of his stacks. Now, of course, having to constantly sack backliners is not a great long-term plan, but if you're running like an aggressive strategy, it tends to work. Also, thing you gotta keep in mind is that on top of him gaining card type resistances, Izou applies a different effect based on which resistance he ends on. Probably the worst one is quick resistance for standard runs, because if he ends the turn with quick resistance, he'll start the next turn with a crit buff, and this crit buff lasts for a fair bit. So if you end too many turns with him on a quick card, you're screwed, because he'll just crit you down. Buster cards are also pretty bad to end on, because what happens is that he'll retaliate by stunning one of your servants on any turn where he ends with Buster resistance. Now, some servants like Xuanzang and Murasaki have ways of bypassing that stun. But in general, unless you know what you're doing, you really don't want to fuck with that. For slower going teams, what you want to do is you want to end turns with an arts card. If you do that, he sucks up all your stars. But, you know, he doesn't gain damage off of it. Now, because I have Paracelsus there, just sort of eating damage, I decided to use a quick card. Just so I can actually gain stars and try to crit him down. I opt to keep Paracelsus alive with Guts that turn. Because if I don't use it there, he's just going to die and it's going to go to waste. So I figure, you know what, let's buy a little bit more time. It does mean that Good Poster Girl is going to wear out. But at this point, I'm willing to take my chances. Likewise, because I have the Cleanse from the Mystic Code, I decided to keep Circe's Buster card for the third card. Just to get a little bit of extra damage going. Yeah, and there's the Cleanse. So phase 2 is really where you need to pick up the pace. Even if you're running an arts team and sort of grinding him down, you do have to think about your damage spikes. And when it's worth ending a turn with a Buster card or a quick card. Just to make sure that your damage sticks onto Izou. This is one area where Circe seems to struggle a fair bit. Because just sort of grinding Izou down with face cards is not her specialty. She doesn't have great, you know, face card modifiers. She's really based off her NP, and it is a strong NP. But, you know, this is a fight where your NP doesn't do that much damage. And while it's nice to turn him into a pig and lock him up, you know, you do have to turn on the jets at some point. And I am running out of backliners at this point. Also, I'll note that extra cards aren't really affected by his resistances. So sometimes I'll just bite the bullet. If I have to use like an AQA chain, I'll do it just to get that extra card going. Now, one of the more annoying things that Izou can do during this second phase is just to spam Mind's Eye. If you get too many of those late into the fight, it's a reset. There's not a whole lot you can do about it besides running a servant that just naturally deals with those buffs. Alright, getting around halfway through Izou's bar. Like again, if you manage your face cards around his resistances, you will wear him down. But it is a question of how long you can stay alive while doing this. I'm down to 2 servants, and that is not great because Izou's buff will start to stack. Quite badly. So I realized that, and I decide, you know what, yeah, let's go back to ending my chains with arts cards. It means I won't be critting for a while, but at this point, chipping him down into kill range is more important. Oh, that's right, I used the Atlas buff on Circe there. Yeah, I figured with the 50-50, Oh no, never mind, that's not the Atlas buff, that's George's Bonsi. That's right, I did take that, huh? Good stuff. Although, yeah, once Izou starts landing face cards and crits onto you, you're in bad shape. I opt to use Waver's NP just to reduce his defense, because I'm hitting him with a Circe NP anyway. Still be Pick-a-Fight, so the stun doesn't really matter. And at this point, his face cards are a substantial enough threat that I don't want to try to stagger them to try to fish for stuns. Well, to try to fish for that stun over another turn, rather. There's no guarantee that Waver's going to be alive long enough to enjoy it. Although, you know, he does have full health. Well, mostly full health in that invuln. So, maybe I could have waited. At this point, I'm just thinking, alright, how am I going to close this damn fight? And thankfully, Circe's self-charge is back off cooldown. Now, here I have a choice. I don't have great targets to use the cooldown reduction on Atlas on. Waver's skills are mostly out of range, and the Circe's, aside from the self-charge, there aren't really great targets that are worth reducing the cooldown of. Thankfully, though, Izou is getting quite low, although I have burned my NP spam at this point. At most, I'll be able to get like one more NP off if I manually charge one. Eventually, he's gonna buy me a turn, even if I get popped. But at this point, I realize I have to use the CDR, and I pop it on Circe just to get that extra defense down. Try to get him into kill range a little bit sooner. I ought to save the invuln for his NP turn. And again, I have to go ABA. Don't want to end on a Buster card, but I want that extra card. So I decide to sack the first arts card. The good news is that this will still help me build up to her NP. Although again, cutting it fairly close. Now the worst thing that could happen here is that Izou focuses down. Well, okay, that was also pretty bad. But as long as Circe doesn't get her bar popped this turn, I should be okay. Alright. Good. Invuln onto Circe. Ideally, he attacks Circe at this point, but even if he doesn't, it's not a huge problem, necessarily. I think I'll be able to finish him off in a turn in some change. A lot of places where this fight can go wrong. Because again, Izou is a crit machine. Unless you plan around that, it can be pretty brutal. I tried a few meme runs with like Miyu and Irisfiel and even Geronimo. Geronimo, maybe I could do it. I would need to get the CE on Mistake. But it's just a thing where he's a really slow servant just at doing anything. Because, you know, when you have 3 mana bursts, what do you do on the turns where your mana burst isn't up? The fight might be a little too fast-paced, but, you know, we'll see when I get to it on Mistake. The problem with Irisfiel and Miyu is that they really want to Arts Brave Chain. So they could spam their, well, maybe not Miyu, but Irisfiel at least really wants to Arts Brave Chain to spam her NP. And the problem is, Arts Brave Chaining is a really good way of losing this particular fight. Because again, Izou gets resistances, and they do stack. Even with one, you're not really going to do any damage to him. So Irisfiel was kind of a bust. You can't really cheese him like that. I think if you run like a defensive team with Jean or something, maybe you could stall him out a while longer. But I don't know. My opinion is that you want to go for just a relatively swift kill. If you have a huge dick team, you can actually kill him with like Buster crits and stuff, because he is vulnerable to face cards. But yeah, that's a higher end thing. I'd recommend the arts route. Something along these lines. You could do it with relatively low end servants. But yeah, I hope you found this useful, and again, like if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time.